Hello, Watermark Books and Cafe. Hello from Cambridge. Hello to Kansas. We're so excited to be here. My name is Kendall Kulper. I'm the author of Murder for the Modern Girl. Just came out in May, and I'm so excited to be talking to a great author and a great friend, my friend Mackenzi Lee, author of so many fantastic books, including the Montague series, which finished up last fall. I don't know time anymore. And lots of fantastic Marvel series, including one that is public. The last one is public,
yes,
right?
We can talk about it finally.
All right, great. Great.
It's hard to differentiate when I've spent years texting you about it. You're like, when are we actually allowed to talk about this?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes when I start talking about it, and then I have to pause and be like, are there Disney snipers on my roof right now, like Target acquired? So yeah, we're just gonna do a fun little chat about our books and probably knowing us lots of other off-topic subjects. So I'm gonna toss it to Mackenzi for the first thing. I don't know what to say.
Tell us about your new book. I love this book and I'm so excited about it. And tell readers what there is to love about this book and what it's about. Also, I feel very unprepared now. Before I just felt a little unprepared, and I feel very unprepared because you showed up extremely cute, makeup, hair done, and I look like I just rolled out of bed at a campsite. And then you also have your book. As soon as you held up the book, I was like, oh boy, haven't done an author event in a while because I was like, nothing. Didn't even cross my mind. So
yeah,
off to a great start.
I almost got your books too, but they're up in my office, which is 900 degrees right now.
Okay.
So.
yeah. I was gonna make a joke about how I intentionally dressed down and intentionally forgot my books to make you look really good because this is like because your book is the one we're really here to promote and talk about. But I don't think I would fool anybody, especially you.
Well, like I said, I'm on the East Coast and you're on the West Coast, so I got 3 extra hours.
Right, that's really what it is.
In preparation.
I was set up to fail.
Right.
Okay, but tell us about Murder for the Modern Girl.
Well, I have to say, first of all, Mackenzi's beautiful, kind words are on my book, which you can't see because I'm sure they're backwards. But it was so great to have Mackenzi blurb my book. That was very sweet. So Murder for the Modern Girl is set in the 1920s in Chicago, and it's about a mind-reading flapper who uses this ability to hunt down bad men who have gotten away with crimes. And as she is investigating an attack on her father, who is the state's attorney for Chicago for Illinois, she starts to get tracked down by a shy, sweet, shape-shifting forensic scientist working in the Chicago morgue. And he slowly starts to accidentally solve her crimes while they meet and start to kind of fall for each other. So it's about feminism and revenge and lots of great parties, lots of great dress scenes, and a great romance, and even a sweet little white dog because everybody loves a dog.
I just had recently, so I'm a bookseller in addition to an author, as most people probably know, and I just had the delightful experience of talking to someone in the bookstore, a teenager who wanted to talk to me specifically because she loves the Gentleman's Guide books, and she's like, I just really like those books. I didn't think historical fiction could be fun. Do you have any other suggestions for like fun historical fiction? And I was like, immediately went to Murder for the Modern Girl, and then have to give the weird disclaimer of like, oh, you want a fun book? This one's got murder in the title. Like, I promise it's fun. It is about murder. And she was so excited. And I love this sort of, it's not an emerging genre, but I think it's an underappreciated genre of fun, peppy, energetic historical fiction. And I'm so happy that our books both share that space because it's my favorite genre. And then to have one of my favorite writers, Kendall Kulper, writing in that genre makes me incredibly happy. And you have a great previous series about witches in Martha's Vineyard called Salt and Storm. And I love those books, but this one is just like, it's so fun and has so much energy to it. And is this whole chat supposed to just be me saying nice things about your book? Because that was
Yeah,
my
no, that
understanding, and
sounds
that's what I
great.
prepared.
That
Also, your
works
hair
great.
looks great. Your skin is glowing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pumping me
Yeah,
up
no,
here.
so yeah, I mean, I love the Montague series because they're just so fun and voicey. And I just re-listened to the last book, Nobleman's Guide to Shipwrecks and Chicanery. What is it again?
Shipwrecks and
Vandals.
Charcuterie. Yeah, my final book in the series.
Um, narrated by your incredible narrator who did such a great job. And I just love the voiciness, and I love how fun history can be. And I think when I was writing this book, I started writing it in 2016, late 2015, early 2016, when the world was sort of, just maybe not just beginning to go off of the ledge, but kind of, in a real way that we were all just like, what is happening? And
before we acclimated to end of the world being just
yeah,
like the
before
status quo.
we were like, oh, this is it's just the way life is now.
Below bar.
And I want, I always text you for book recommendations. It's like, having the best form of Google in my pocket. And I'm always like, I want a book that's 1940s and a romance, but it's not about war. And I want it to be fun.
Except Google doesn't keep texting you periodically for the next 4 to 8 weeks as you're like, no, I found one. And it's like, but have you actually tried this one?
That's what makes it so good. But anyway, like I was like texting you a lot about like, I want books that are just like joyful, like happy, like, not like nothing happens, that it's not like exciting or I just wanted a book that made me feel good about life. And so I started like writing a book that kind of made me feel good. And it was just such a, for being a book about murder and revenge and science and, Guy, the shape-shifting character, has a lot of kind of self-worth issues that he's sort of navigating, for a book that deals with a lot of those really heavy subjects. Being inside that main character, Ruby the flapper, being inside her head was just such a joyful place to be, because she just loved to have fun, and she was really smart, and she's really capable. And I think a lot of times you write the book that you need to be reading, and that was this book for me. And this book had a long time before I finished writing it, until it found a publisher, and I'm a great publisher, Holiday House. And so many times I would reread it, which is not something that I ever do with any of my books. And but I just love to be in that world. And so many times I would text you to be like, I just want this book to exist because I just love it so much and it makes me so happy. But I wanted to like have that happy place for other people as well. And I think you, just like I said, like you write the books that you want to be reading, which I think is something that I've heard you say and talk about with your books as well, especially the Montague books.
Yeah, I was just in Michigan for a week teaching a writing workshop for 13 to 18-year-olds who were all just like precocious and darling, and exactly who you would expect would be the kind of 13 to 18-year-old who's like, I want to spend my summer on the shores of Lake Michigan learning about novels. And so I spent like a week with my little group of 10 teaching them. And I think most of them, I think one of them maybe had read one of my books, but they were pretty unfamiliar with my work. And then at the end, we did like a faculty reading. And so I got up and I read specifically from Gentleman's Guide, the part where Monty takes off all his clothes and runs naked through Versailles. And it was delightful. And it got a great reaction from the crowd, loved it. And then after my class met up, and they were all kind of looking at me, and they sort of had this like appointed representative who finally goes, you didn't tell us you wrote books like that. And I was like, ooh, like what? And she's like, they're really funny. Like, thank you. Appreciate after we spent a week together in a classroom, the incredulity in your voice. But she's like, but you said they were historical fiction, so we didn't think they'd be funny. It's like, well, that's where you're wrong, because people in the past, shockingly, had a sense of humor. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got into historical fiction and what your gateway drugs into it were, and specifically what your gateway drug into this particular niche of like fun, peppy, exciting historical fiction, as opposed to like sad war books that win Pulitzer Prizes?
Well, I guess we all knew that the conversation was going to turn to this subject, as all conversations must eventually turn to this subject, because you know the answer to the question of my historical fiction gateway drug, which was Newsies. Newsies. It was Newsies, of course.
I mean, I was gonna go a little further back with American Girl dolls, but Newsies would be
well,
second.
you know, yeah, I have to say I was more about the magazines. I didn't read a ton of books. And
you were in it for the consumer. You were in it for the consumerism.
Yeah, exactly.
A true American girl.
Well, okay, the catalog.
Like the modern magazine. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Magazine. Yeah. Which I definitely had a subscription through like high school. I remember like my grandma got me the subscription, and every year she'd be like, "You doing this? You doing this again?
Level this up
another year?" And I'd be like, "We're doing it again." But yeah, I mean, yeah. So Newsies, specifically Newsies fan fiction, was my first real like writing attempt, and the first, like sometimes I look back and I'm like, where did I get the stamina that I wrote like a 70,000 Newsies fanfic epic when I was like 14, and it really was just all the things that I do now. It was like researching 1899 New York City and like reading books about newspaper boys, and like immersing yourself in this world. And by my third fanfic, like the movie has been like long gone in the dust, and that was kind of like the first thing that I really, really loved. And so then I went to college and I studied history, which I loved. My program was so fantastic. I talk about it a lot. It's called History and Literature. And it's this really interesting interdisciplinary program where you look at history through the things that people create. So and literature is very broad. I think when the program started, it was like actual literature, but nowadays it can be anything. Like a quilt can be literature, or a chair can be literature, or a house can be literature. It's anything that somebody has created, and it's looking at history. How are people recording history and responding to history and conceptualizing history through the things that they are creating, and then how do we get a deeper interpretation of history by studying those things. So it was just, it was a great program. It was so interesting. And I was writing a little bit in college, and I was writing like really boring adult short stories where it was like, people that like had divorces and affairs, and like, I was 19 and obviously I didn't know anything about any of that. And I kind of thought like, oh, this is like the stuff I should be writing. I shouldn't be writing fan fiction anymore. I should be writing these boring grown-up stories that were terrible and not interesting to read. And it just sort of sucked the fun out of writing. And then I went to afterwards, after college,
my bangs are killing me. It's fine.
How's it working out for you?
It's great.
Then after college, I started to work as a journalist, and that was kind of a little soul-sucking in a different way. And I started to think about what was the last thing that I wrote that really brought me joy, and it was those Newsies fanfic, and started thinking like, oh, maybe I should write for this exciting new genre called YA, because this was like, now, oh my God, like 20 years ago at this point. No, not 20 years ago, like 15 years ago.
Creeping
Oh,
up on 20, round up.
I know. Yeah, and so that was how I got into writing YA, and then I wrote a couple manuscripts that were terrible and didn't go anywhere, and then finally settled on historical fantasy as kind of my genre of choice. And incredibly, I'm actually using a liberal arts degree. I'm actually putting it to good use. Like, who thought that was going to happen? Not me.
It's interesting. I love the description of your program, and I love the Sound of the History and Literature program, because I think we understand a lot of things about our present moment and how society sort of interacts with current affairs through art, but we don't grant that same understanding to people in the past. So we think we understand that so much art that is happening right now is in reaction to our current political climate. But then when we think about history, or we think about historical fiction, or not historical fiction, when we think about books written in the past or art from the past or anything, it's like, okay, so these are stuffy things that hang in galleries that I'm forced to go look at on vacation to entertain my parents, or history is just like a collection of dates and facts and figures with no sort of human context around it. And part of the thing I love so much about historical fiction is that it individualizes history. And we understand that we're all experiencing, say, 2022, the hellscape. We're all experiencing the same things, but they mean different things for each of us, right? They affect us based on socio-political, economic, gender, sexuality, religion, like all of these things go into how you're affected by the sort of choices in the world happening on a larger scale. But we don't sort of grant that same individuality when we talk about things in the past. We say, everybody experienced World War II, everybody experienced the potato famine or whatever. And I love historical fiction because it brings that sort of individual experience to history, and it humanizes and individualizes these big grand events and helps you remember that, like, we're all the same. That's my other favorite thing, is you go back through literature, through art, through quilts, through houses, whatever, and you remember that, like, we're all just people on an individual level. Who This is getting very philosophical, but it's what I really love about it, is that, like, at the end of the day, we're all just people who want the same thing. And I love finding those moments of sort of humanity in the mess of historical research you do, and you're like, oh, that's also how I feel in the 21st century, same as James Boswell felt in the 1700s. We both feel depressed and like we're a waste of space sometimes. Bingo, human experience.
Yeah, and I'll just say, like, I remember I was researching, I don't know, one of the books, and I came across this collection of diaries. I think it was like a North American women. And one of the diaries was by like a teenage girl, I think in the 1800s, and maybe she was going out west with her family or something like that. And what stuck in my head is that she was like so boy crazy, and it was like these incredible historical moments are happening all around her, and she's like, who am I going to go to the dance with next Friday? Because Freddie's really cute, but George has a horse, and I really love a horse, and my mom says that I can wear her pink dress. It's just so, you remember that, like, teenagers are teenagers kind of throughout history. And it's just so great. It's so great to acknowledge kind of that yeah, like, sense of humor and life and, vibrancy and joy. And, one thing I'll also just add about the program that I think is so great, and so, I wish people thought of history in this way, is, you always hear history is written by the winners. And history, and especially literature, especially the kind of canonical literature that is often studied, is written by, primarily one kind of person, which is primarily a white, educated man in a position of power. And the wonderful thing when you expand your concept of literature or creative acts is that you start to access so many stories that are otherwise ignored. You can tell so much by the things that people make. Like, I remember studying in college a dress that I think it was a Puritan woman made for her children, or one of her children. I think she had several miscarriages, and she had made this dress for her surviving child that was just so beautiful and intricate. And you could just see, this is not the kind of thing that people had the time usually to make, but you could just see how much, hope and love she just put into every tiny little stitch. And she's not sitting down with a diary to write out, here's how I feel, but you can get those same emotions by looking at the things that she created. And it's really powerful, especially when you consider how many people throughout history, didn't have access to books or literacy or, any other way to kind of record their feelings and their emotions. But you can look at the things that they created and know, like there's just, you can look at a piece of wood joinery and think, okay, this person was a master and they must have spent hours at this, and probably they learned it from their father, their, grandfather. And it's just, that to me is just so fascinating when you start to think about the things that are kind of outside the canon. I think it just expands the amount of stories that you can tell throughout history. And that, I think, is like, people think of history as, like you said, as dates, and it doesn't change, and it happened and you just learn what happened and you moved on. But there's so much that we're constantly redefining, historical figures and events and the effects of these events and how people thought about them and felt about them, and not just how one narrow subset of people thought and felt about them, but the range of people. So that to me is just what makes history so exciting, that you're always, it's like a treasure hunt. You're always just uncovering something new and cool.
What made you pick 1920s Chicago?
Well, I read a really great book about forensic science that I always recommend to people. It's called The Poisoner's Handbook. It's by Deborah Blum. Highly recommend it. There's also PBS like mini series about it. And it was just so fascinating. She was looking at basically the first modern forensic science lab in the country, which was started in the medical examiner's office in New York City during Prohibition, when a lot of people started poisoning themselves by making bathtub gin and their own sort of homemade alcohol. And it was just this really fascinating story about how scientists for the very first time were using science to capture criminals. And it seems like such a basic idea, but it was groundbreaking at the time. And for a while, murderers and scientists were kind of playing this cat and mouse game. And I thought that was such a, the 1920s in general are just such a fun, interesting, rich topic. And I felt like, but I kind of felt like a lot of those stories had sort of been told a little bit. And this was a story that I hadn't really ever heard before, that I just thought was so interesting. So I started to think like, well, if I had a character that was going to go around poisoning people, what would she be? And, she'd have to have a really good reason for it, or people would think that she was a terrible monster. And thinking like, okay, well, if she can read minds, then she's pretty set morally on that she believes what she's doing is right. And, it just kind of led to asking more questions, and then those questions leading to more questions, and, having a character who's a little bit her foil, who's a forensic scientist and working to solve the crimes that she's committing. And then I set it in Chicago because I have lived in Chicago and too many things are set in New York City. So I thought it's always nice to have the setting, a place that really well. So that's what I like to do. It's nice to kind of have something in mind, like where you're sort of walking down the street and how the air feels. And I'm working on the next book it starts in Chicago, and my editor just crossed out a line where I describe in very specific detail how cold winter is in Chicago. And I wrote back like, no, this has to stay in the book because
you don't understand.
the winter cold in Chicago is such a weird, specific, horrible monster that I just feel like anybody who lives in Chicago knows that it's like you have the cold coming off the prairie, and then you have the cold coming off the lake, and you're just like caught in the middle, and it's just so weird and terrible and awful. So that line, I'm gonna fight for it. Hopefully it stays in the book.
So I also lived in Chicago for a much shorter time than you did, but I remember being so struck by the fact that it's such an Art Deco city, like it feels like a city of the 1920s, and then learning it was because of wasn't there the fire that burned everything down, and like yeah, and so they like basically rebuilt the city in that era, and so there's a building downtown that literally was built to look like a champagne bottle. Like it feels like a very Art Deco-y, prohibition-y, roaring 20s kind of city. So, or a city that I guess would be a middle finger to prohibition. So I thought it was such a great fit for the book, and clearly a place that you know and love very well, and not just the cold. How are we doing on time? Do we need to start wrapping up?
We have 8 minutes before Zoom kicks us off.
Okay, let's tell everyone what you're working on now and what your next book is going to be, because this is going to be a little series or a little duology, isn't it?
Yeah, sort of. So
okay, well, never mind.
I only say that because the books are related in the sense that they share a couple characters, but or they share one character, but they're otherwise totally separate. So you don't need to read one to read the other. You don't need to know everything about one to enjoy the other. They're just kind of their own little spheres, but they're set in the same world. So it's called A Starlet's Secret to a Sensational Afterlife. And it is about a young girl, a teenage girl named Henrietta, and she decides to move from Chicago to Hollywood in 1934 to become an actress. And while she's out there in Los Angeles, she starts seeing mysterious girls appearing around the city, and her best friend, who's another actress, mysteriously disappears. And she starts to realize that there is something weird going on in the studios, and something is happening to all these girls. And as she is trying to become a star, the studio forces her into a sham relationship, because everybody loves fake dating tropes, with a surly stuntman named Declan Collins, who is immune to being hurt, but he has to keep that a secret. So it is super fun when I sort of talk about books that bring me joy and characters whose heads are just joyful places to be in. Henrietta is like, she's just the best. She is literally just a rocket ship of joy. She, I have a banner hanging in my bedroom that reads, "Joy is an act of resistance." And that is this character to a T. And again, it was sort of a book that I really needed to write and to read. And it's a book about how do you feel joyful when terrible things are happening, especially terrible things that you feel in a lot of ways powerless to control and to fight. And how do you continue to find joy in life and love and friendship and all those really important things. So it's coming out next spring, TBD. Yeah, I'm just really, really excited about it.
I mean, it definitely doesn't sound topical at all. Finding joy in hard things you can't control, a studio system that abuses young women.
Yeah.
I don't know where you get these crazy ideas.
Yeah. Well, the hardest thing about this book, which was like the biggest struggle, is that Murder for the Mono Girl has sort of a historical reference to things kind of getting slightly better for the people that this main character is fighting for. But, you know, the Hollywood system, it's like you scratch the surface of the Hollywood system and nothing but pain comes out. It's like
Notoriously fair and equitable in the 21st century.
it's like the truly the like saddest, most desperate, most
Yeah.
depressing. And, you know, has anything changed? I don't know. So that was the biggest challenge is, you know, how do I write a book that has a happy ending that is still true to life? Because we all know we're still dealing with a lot of this BS in present day. So that was kind of my, it turned out, I think, to be a positive of, you know, how does this character, how does she reconcile the challenges of her life and of the world without letting that destroy joy and happiness and hope inside of her, which, you know, personally is something that I really needed over the last couple of years and maybe every single day. And hopefully it's something that will resonate with readers as well.
Awesome. Well, one last question before Zoom kicks us off. What are you reading right now? Especially since this is an event for an independent bookstore. Tell us the last book you bought and are reading from your local independent bookstore.
Oh my gosh. Well, the last book that I bought in person was Casey McQuiston's I Could Share a Wheeler, right? Am I saying that right?
I think so. Oh, we're about to get crashed by a bear. Oh no.
It was inevitable.
She walked by me. That was shocking.
And then I also bought, that was from Porter Square Books in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and which is great. Although I bought the hardcover, but then I got the audiobook out of the library, and so I just have the hardcover like sitting prettily on my night table.
I'm the kind of person I listen to or read books in some way before I buy them to make sure I want the book as like a memento of the good time that I spent with it. I almost never buy books I haven't read, so you're in good company with the hardcover as art piece on the shelf after reading it in a different format.
Well, you know, I go into sign books and it's bad manners to walk into an independent bookstore and walk out empty-handed. That's what I say. There's something in that bookstore that you can buy. So I'll tell you the other thing that I bought from Trident Bookstore, which is in Boston, was Kate Bauer's I Hope This Finds You Well, which are her internet deletion poems that are just really fascinating and fun.
Cool. Well, this has been lovely to talk to you. I'm so happy we got to have this conversation, which really just felt like a pretty normal conversation between us.
This is the most we talk about our books. Usually people are like,
I know.
What's going on with Mackenzi professionally? And I'm like, I have no idea, but I can tell you exactly what she thought about, you know, the last season of Love is Blind.
I can tell you about her skin right now. I can tell you whether she's dehydrated or not.
Regimen.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to catch up professionally through events.
I know, this is great. Thank you, Watermark, for letting us chat. And thank you, Kansas.
And shop local, shop independent. I'm a big, everybody is, but like I've worked in independent bookstores for a long time and I love them. And I'm grateful to independent bookstores for hosting us and for finding a way to stay open and stay working in these trying times. And shop local, shop independent. All Zoom says is less than a minute and it's stressing me out. It's going to cut us off. What's going to happen? Like it's just going to go black at some point.
I don't know. All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Check out Mackenzi's great books and
read Murder for the Modern Girl.
All right.
That's great. Bye.